Hello, I'm Julian Greystoke, and I have a foot. Leg, technically. Today we are here to talk about a book called Bad Parts. This book was a request from a patron, so I'm sorry that it took me so long. I actually read it a while ago, I just haven't had any time to record videos, so I'm behind. Let's go ahead and read the synopsis using my tablet, Guilty Spark. A town divided, a demon made whole. Nigel, I'm trying to read. If you would just maybe not so much with your tail. When rock guitarist Ash Hudson suffers a career-ending hand injury, she seeks out the only thing that can heal her, her hometown's darkest secret. For decades, the residents of Hollow Hills, Pennsylvania have offered their diseased and injured body parts to a creek demon named Snare. In return, Snare rewards its traders with healthy replacement parts. There's only one catch. If traders leave town, their new parts vanish forever. Ash wants a new hand, but living in Hollow Hills isn't an option. Not when her band is 1 gig away from hitting the big time. Desperate, she bargains with Snare, promising to help the demon complete its organ collection in exchange for both a new hand and the freedom of everyone in town. As her band's show rapidly approaches, Ash teams up with her estranged father in a last-ditch effort to recruit new traders. But not everyone trusts Snare's offer, and Ash soon learns how far her neighbors will go to protect their precious parts. With her family in danger and her band waiting, Ash must find a way to help Snare. But even if she succeeds, there's no telling what Snare plans to do with everyone's bad parts.
Got a heart in there. 6 of them. Intestines, large or small. Spleen in 3 different colors. What about lungs?
So that's a solid synopsis. That is a pretty tempting blurb, I have to say. Makes me want to read it. I think that this was published by an indie press, a small press. Okay, and it is what appears to be a small press, Midnight Point Press. They seem to focus on dark fiction, which I think that most would agree that this book is. Yeah, it looks like they have all of 3 authors, so they're small press. They're tiny. So this isn't quite a self-published book, but still very small. It's not published by one of the big names. And I am very interested in reading both self-published and small press published books. Let's get on to this review. There's probably going to be some spoilers because there's stuff I want to talk about. First of all, the title of this book. I was really drawn to the title. I was like, this is interesting. It really fit well with the themes that we were going to be dealing with in this book, and I was like, yeah, ooh, I like it. Bad parts. And Snare and the body parts and everything, but then you also find out that the main character's band is called Bad Parts, and I didn't like that. That's just a preference thing. I just didn't care for it. I thought that was hitting it too hard. Call her band something else. The main character of this book is an intentionally unlikable character, and most of the characters are actually. She's extremely self-serving, and she's really only out here to follow her own goals, her own dreams. Other characters sometimes ascribe virtues to her, which we, the reader, never get to see from her. She is our most prevalent viewpoint character, although you do get a few viewpoints from other characters, but when we are with her thought process, she is 100% just in it for herself most of the time. Her goal is to be a famous singer, and she is willing to do whatever it takes to get there, which can make her kind of unpleasant to hang out with as a reader. So go in knowing that if you're the kind of person who just can't stand an unlikable main character, this might not be the book for you. And I struggle a lot of the time to relate to unlikable main characters. Her, I didn't struggle as much because we both have kind of similar goals. Like, she wants to be a musician, I want to be a writer. So it's like, at least I kind of understand where she's coming from. The writing in this book was a little bit uneven at times, especially when it came to character voice. We're in a couple of different characters' heads and they all sound exactly the same. I think the author has a really strong voice and hasn't really figured out how to differentiate characters' voices that well yet. New characters and important plot points just sort of appear when they're needed, with no hint that they ever existed before. Like, the main character has a fucking estranged twin brother that we never even hear about until he shows up on the page. And it's like, you couldn't have spared a single, like, fleeting thought to warn the reader that this was a thing. It felt like the cliche of a pantser. I was like, Was any planning put into this book? And if not, as a pantser, it's okay to go back in and add some foreshadowing. But this book just wasn't interested in giving you any warning ahead of time. It's like when a character needs to be there, they will simply appear, and when a plot point needs to be there, it will simply happen, and you get no warning that these things might be a possibility beforehand. The main character also conveniently only knew about one part of Snare's curse, just for plot reasons. Like, there was no good reason that she would only know about the one part. Some character backgrounds in this book are also a little bit much for me. Everybody in this book, because it's dark fiction, is very tortured. But there's a little boy who is blind, and we find out the story of how he went blind, and it's just over the top. It's just kind of absurd. Yes, I know, I am reading a book about a creek demon who gives people limbs, but like at the same time I'm reading this and being like, I believe the creek demon more than I believe your story about how this kid went blind. I was really excited when I did find out suddenly and inexplicably that Ash did have an estranged twin brother, because the sibling stuff could be really meaty and great character stuff to get into. Unfortunately, it ended up feeling really shallow. Ash almost never thinks about her brother, again because she mostly thinks about herself, and no, she doesn't really learn either. But we never really get that dense, meaty family shit that I was looking forward to. As you might expect, with a book about replacing people's bad parts, there can be some sort of casual ableism going on in this book. Do keep in mind, however, that none of the characters, 0 characters, are good people, so it is really difficult to tell if the casual ableism is on the part of the author or the part of these really kind of asshole-ish characters. Some side characters feel pretty shallow, but at least none of these characters seem to fall directly into a all good or all bad archetype. They definitely lean more towards the bad in general, but they all kind of have chaotic neutral energy, which I feel is maybe a little bit more realistic. I just wish that we had gotten more with the characters to make them deeper and done more with characters instead of plot. This is a very plot-focused book. When there could have been a lot of really great character stuff, it really does focus more on the plot. But if you are looking for characters who aren't just like good, evil, even Snare, the demon, then this might be the book for you. The plot of this book, as I just mentioned, is the main focus. However, it can get a little bit aimless sometimes, and the main character seriously lacks focus. Once she figures out what her mission is, you'd think she would mostly be trying to do that, but she gets distracted by everything, and sometimes she's just faffing around doing fuck all. There is one cinnamon bun character, I don't think we ever got his point of view. Cheeto.
Dangerously cheesy.
I really wish we had gotten to find out what his real name was. I feel so bad for him, but he is the best of us. We do not deserve Cheeto. Too good for this world, too pure. Obviously, he was my favorite character because I'm always going to be drawn to a cinnamon roll. I do relate to the main character in that she values herself most for what she can do and not like any just sort of inherent value that she has as a human. And I honestly relate to that because a lot of times I struggle to value myself as anything other than what I can produce and what I can put into the world. There is one sex scene in this book. It was short and felt really fucking out of place. Why is it here? What is it for? Were we trying to up the word count? Like, just why? I'm just gonna read what I wrote. As the characters do more and more reprehensible things to achieve their goals, I realize how unintrospective the writing/characters are. I like that we get a lot of character actions, but after a while I started struggling to understand everyone's motivation. Like, for example, if I suddenly couldn't write books anymore, I would draw the line somewhere before mutilating unwilling people was a possibility. Like, I'm sorry, I will figure out another way. But yes, this is a real problem. None of these characters are introspective, and so sometimes you struggle to understand exactly why they are going so friggin' far. And you guys know I don't like a lot of navel-gazing in a book. I do like a book that lets us see who a character is through their actions, but sometimes you gotta justify those actions. And after a while it's like, wow, do I not believe that you would go that far just to get your rock and roll career off the ground. Like, you gotta give me more. And also any relationship stuff that she has with her brother, again, it feels shallow. She almost feels a little bit like she might be like a psychopath. Like, she doesn't seem to ever have much of any empathy ever. And so you're in her head where she might be saying something sympathetic, but you don't believe it because it's never backed up by any of her thoughts. Mostly because she doesn't really have very many thoughts on the page. I wrote, Cheeto feels like a paladin trapped in a group of chaotic neutrals, all in it for themselves, and he deserves better. Poor Cheeto. Cheeto deserves better. Hashtag Cheeto deserves better. For example, he deserves a real name. Again, another heads up, there is one use of the N-word in this book. It just kind of startled me because I wasn't expecting it. It came out of nowhere. And a line that didn't even really need to be there. So I just try to warn you and give you a heads up about like what to brace for in this book, such as casual ableism, sex scene that came the fuck out of nowhere, and the N-word. One thing this author is supremely good at is making sure that nothing, zero things are ever easy for the characters. Whatever the characters try to do, it will go wrong every time, and when they try to compensate for it going wrong, that will go wrong. Piles and piles of things not working out for the characters. Which I appreciate because sometimes that's something I struggle with. Sometimes I do need to make things harder for my characters. However, this book took it to an exhausting level. Sometimes something has to work out for these people, just one or two things, but every single time they tried anything, it didn't work. And while I appreciate what the author was doing, it was tiring by the end. I was like, can they please just solve something, anything, without 3 layers of it going wrong? These characters could not have spread butter on toast without accidentally gouging their own eyeball out with a butter knife. Again, with the D&D references, this is just a book full of chaotic neutral people all rolling ones. So now we're going to be getting a little bit into the ending, and again, we are going to be talking about spoilers here, so I guess it's going to be a pretty spoilery one. We finally get to near the climax, and we find out what snare is, and we have a very Stephen King-esque, it was Native Americans all along! And I kind of thought we were done doing that in our horror books. I thought we were finished with, it was a Native American burial ground, it was a Native American ritual, and in this case, it's a Native American ghost seeking justice for her people, and it's like, I hate it. I hate it. Why couldn't she just have been a demon? The main character's brother gives 0 fucks about his wife. That made me really upset. Like, all of the characters are really invested in this kid, this blind kid. They're all like, this kid, we love him, we will die for him, whatever. But like, the brother's wife, the mother of the child, fuck her, I guess. Bad things happen to her, terrible things happen to her, and he doesn't care. He doesn't even really, he's like, at one point I think he maybe asks about her, when it turns out that horrible things have happened to her, he's just like, okay, glad I know that. What the fuck? None of these people care about each other. Because of the nature of this whole Russian nesting doll of bad things and things never working out for the characters, the climax goes on forever. Just too long. This is too much climax. You have to put some climax back. Because, again, this author is obsessed with nothing ever working the first time and layers upon layers of struggle for these people, which is fine for a climax, but it just keeps going. This book is incredibly gory, as you might imagine for a book that's about, like, body parts that, like, disappear if you get too far out of town. And after a while, I became desensitized to the violence. I think there's a certain level of violence that I need in a book before I just zone out and I'm like, oh, cool. His leg got snapped and the bone's sticking out. Do not go to this book if you were hoping for a happy ending. I mean, that should be obvious. Again, dark fiction. I might be the only person who feels this, but I feel like dark fiction is just kind of like edgy for the sake of edgy, and I'm not a huge fan of it. But that's probably an unpopular opinion that's going to get me slaughtered in the comments by people who love dark fiction. There's just so much death. Violent, bloody, disgusting, contorted corpses, death for everyone. I wouldn't have minded, like, a few more people to survive. I certainly wasn't expecting a happy ending, and I certainly didn't need most of the people to survive. But there are some characters that thematically, I think it would have actually been better if they had survived. And my last note, which is apparently just randomly I thought of it. I don't like that Snare turns out to be the reason that the main character's hand was injured in the first place. That felt way too contrived. That could have been left out. That didn't even need to be there. It could have just been the main character hurts her hand. There's a mosh pit earlier that I was expecting her to get involved in, and that would be where she would hurt her hand, but it wasn't. So it's Snare that somehow has a connection to the main character and hurts the main character's hand, and then she goes there and makes the deal. It could have just been, they could have still had a connection. I'm fine with the connection, but it could have been the main character hurts her hand, she goes to the creek, and then Snare is like, sees this opportunity, was just lying in wait for this opportunity and was like, oh, we have a connection and I can manipulate you. Versus this whole convoluted Snare who has never left the creek suddenly has the ability to do so this one time just to do this one thing. No, it's dumb. But that's it for my review of Bad Parts. Definitely interesting. It kept me reading, or in my case, listening. Oh, speaking of listening, I don't normally comment necessarily on the audiobook because the quality of the audio doesn't normally bother me, but there was some inconsistent quality in this particular audiobook where you could tell when they had spliced in a correction, if that makes sense. Like, the reader would be reading along, and then probably they read a sentence wrong the first time, and so they would have to splice in the correct version, and the audio quality between them was noticeable. So I don't know what was going on there. One would think, even though it's a small press, that they might try a bit harder to get their audio quality a bit better. But that's my review. Yes, hey, that was my review. If you are looking for something nothing like Bad Parts, you can check out my fantasy romance, The Wolf and the Hawk, available now on Amazon. So if you need a palate cleanser from all of these terrible people who do terrible things, maybe check out my book. If you liked what you saw here and you want to see more, there's a ton of videos here on this channel, plus I have a Patreon with exclusive videos not seen here on the regular channel. There's all kinds of weird stuff over there, so definitely consider checking it out. Plus, your donations help me publish my own books. Don't forget that all the links to my social media are in the doobly-doo for ease of your clicking, and I will see all of you again next time with whatever it is I happen to be doing next time. Bye!
Let me explain. No, there is too much. Let me sum up.
Steve, Kit, Hidden Glade, Persephone, Light Julie, OS, Anna, Belle, Patrick, and Sophie, Callison, Artemis, Shelby, Zaire, Jesper, Irene, Scribbling Cat, Savvy, Jenny, Amanda, Lisa, Sarah, Lennox, and Merween. Please don't bury me down in that cold, cool ground. No, I'd rather that you cut me up and pass me all around. Throw my brain in a hurricane, the blind can have my eyes, and the deaf can have both of my ears, they don't mind the size.